When you go for your very first run, your body could care less how far you made it, but it knows exactly how long you went out there and how hard you went.
Yes.
So, all right, podcast's over.
And we're done. And we're done.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Coaches on Couches.
Being slouches.
We got a couch, a chair, two coaches.
Mm-hmm. We're counting it.
Yep. New mics.
New mics.
We're feeling pretty official now.
Pretty podcasty. I actually feel like a DJ, to be honest.
Yeah, total disc jockey.
The next song coming up on the playlist. Throwback.
Got a face for radio, buddy. All right, today we are going to talk about, should you be training with distance or time? Something we actually get asked a decent amount.
Mm-hmm.
You know, looking through people's training programs, or what they've been doing when they come on as a new client. That's kind of one of the big things that we've looked at, especially if they've found their way into an injury.
Yep.
That's the first thing I'll look for.
And most of your general programs, like the pre-built stuff, will follow one of those two, either distance-based or typically time-based.
Yep. So what's best for you will depend on a lot of things, and we'll get to it in just a second. I am Coach Dale Sanford.
I am Coach Bryant Funston. We are the co-founders of BPC Performance Coaching, where we specialize in helping time-crunch athletes optimize their busy schedules so they can maximize their athletic performance. You can find out more about BPC by going to buildpeakcompete.com, checking Facebook and YouTube at Build Peak Compete, and all up on it Instagram at BPC Performance, and wherever you stream your favorite podcasts, you should be able to find us.
Absolutely.
Be sure to give us those thumbs up, likies.
Yeah.
Subscribes, bells, bing, bing, bing.
Virtual high fives, we call them.
Yes.
Yep. Any type of rating review, always appreciated.
Mm-hmm. If it's 5-star.
Otherwise, you're dead to us. All right. So this is normally more of a topic of conversation when people are coming into a sport, an endurance sport. Mm-hmm. So when you're starting out, look, your body doesn't really know how far you've gone. When you go for your very first run, your body could care less how far you made it, but it knows exactly how long you went out there and how hard you went.
Yes.
So, all right, podcast's over.
And we're done. And we're done. I think the big thing to consider here is not all miles are equal.
Yep.
So depending on your sport, whether it's running, cycling, going uphill versus downhill is going to make a pretty big difference.
Yeah. So
into a headwind.
Yeah. When you're
tailwind, big difference.
Yeah. Every course brings on different demands, mm-hmm. and that's the goal of training, right? Your goal to finish an event is to train as specifically for that event as possible.
Yep.
And that includes the distance you're having to go. Yes, but the terrain is going to be one of the biggest determining factors of how long it takes you to cover that distance. So, it just doesn't, in our minds, it doesn't make sense to always just train for, even though your event is a specific start and finish distance, mm-hmm. That event, like a Ironman in, let's say Utah, and an Ironman in Florida on the same person on the same day with the same fitness, going to be two very different times.
Exactly. Yep.
I mean, it could be a 30-minute to an hour or more swing. Mm-hmm.
And even the same course on different days can end up being
Sure.
a different total duration.
Absolutely. So, the big thing for us is progression, right? So when you take on somebody new or you're trying to help an athlete be prepared to finish a race, you always have to be conscious of where their starting point is. And so, obviously, if you progress them too quickly, you end up injured.
Too much too soon is not a good thing. Yeah.
And so by going by time rather than distance, you are creating a much more predictable progression in training load.
Yeah. Yeah. If you are subscribing to time and intensity versus distance, you have a lot more control. And essentially it sort of takes the elements, the external conditions out of it. So if you're traveling, if you're doing a different course, if you're doing something new where maybe it's hillier than it was when you were previously training, or maybe it's higher altitude, or maybe, there's a lot of external factors. Maybe it's a lot hotter. Like that's going to affect your pace, like all of that stuff, even though intensity may feel higher at higher heat. If you're just subscribing to pace and distance, for example, you're not accounting for those external factors on the body, which are stress.
You might be prepared to finish the distance, but if all you did was make sure that you could go 13 miles or whatever, then you're leaving out the fact that 13 miles for you running in your local neighborhood could be 2 hours. And then when you go out to Moab to do your half marathon, it could be 2.5, So you have to.
And that's when you're just thinking about the goal event. But I think the big thing for us as coaches is we want to make sure you're progressing within a safe manner. Like you're scaling your volume up in a safe manner. And you can say, okay, this week, if it's a cyclist, we're going to have you do a 15-mile bike. And then next week, say we're going to increase that by 10 to 20%. But if you now choose a totally different course, or maybe you go out of town and, for the folks here in Memphis, the Green Line. So maybe the 15-miler you did was Green Line, pancake flat, great day. And then you decide, okay, I'm going to increase my distance that 10%. So now I'm going to do 16.5 miles. Well, now you go, okay, well, I'm heading over to Arkansas on this trip, and there's these cool climbs I want to try to do. And so your 15 miles that maybe it took you an hour to do, you're now hitting hills, which are totally different. And you got a headwind. And now that 16.5 miles, which is only 10% longer, is taking you 2 hours.
Yeah.
Big difference.
That's not
in what your body is feeling.
Yeah. And that's not an exaggeration of possibilities there.
No.
I mean, you can go and, like you said, go pancake flat 6 miles, might take you it could take you 18 minutes, and then go climb.
Did we switch to,
we're going 20 miles an hour.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So 20 miles an hour, right? Is that right? That's right. Math,
6
right?
miles. Yep. Yeah.
So 18 minutes. And then we were just talking about math before this.
We were.
I should have been a disc jockey. Inside joke. Now I have to explain
You
it.
kind of are.
Yeah. So every math class in elementary school when I was in school had the poster on the wall saying what jobs required what level of math. And everyone was like, well, what job does not require any math? And I don't know why they were picking on disc jockeys back in the day, but it was always disc jockey.
Always DJ. I was like, that's what I want.
Yeah. So you go 6 miles flat, 18 minutes or whatever.
Yeah.
6 miles up.
Coal Bank.
Yeah.
Coal Bank Pass.
45.
For all our Colorado fans.
Yeah. Coal Bank Pass in Durango. 45 to an hour plus, you're going up, what's the average? Like 8%?
Yeah, just by about 6%. Yeah. At 9,000 feet. I mean.
Right. So two pretty reasonable examples on how you going 6 miles or a specific mileage is totally different based on terrain and intensity level, because going up that climb, when you're hitting those 8 to 10% pitches, you're now forced to put out threshold plus to keep moving so you don't fall over or
Well, and then you take altitude as well, another external factor, right? So your plan may call for 6 miles, and totally different if you're just going mileage based, right? But if we change that to, or even if you include intensity into that, if you say 6 miles and we're going to hit tempo efforts, but that's still a difference of 20 minutes and possibly an hour, depending on the fitness level, right? But if the program then said you're going to do a 45-minute ride, now it doesn't necessarily matter at tempo effort. Now you would just turn around before you got to the top of the climb. And if you're on the green line, you're going further. A flat course, you'd end up going further because you're hitting a time standpoint and intensity. It's much more controlled, and it allows you to not have to necessarily worry about all those external factors that could really change that training stress, which kind of goes back to one of our other podcasts talking about training stress.
Yeah, and so our kind of guideline for progression of workload, because that's kind of how we think about it. We're not trying to necessarily progress your distance per se. Like we're going
byproduct.
Yeah, like what are you outputting?
Same courses, it's the byproduct's going to be further as you scale, but
right. And so we're trying to progress the workload, and the workload is a consideration of time and intensity.
Correct.
So if we're just going, again, we're beating this horse pretty good. There's a great bit by Nate Bargatze about moving a dead horse.
Yeah. You need the first one to get to the horse.
Be the first one to get to.
Look it up.
So we've beaten this horse.
Yep.
Yeah. So we're normally, our normal progression is like 20% max, for somebody who's been in the sport, has been there before, 20% jump in workload can be safe for most people who have some chronological training in them. But if if you go from let's just say you go from 10 miles to, a 10% increase is just a mile pretty much.
Yeah.
So you're going from 10 to 11. If you run a 11-minute mile, you're now adding another 11 minutes. It's in my head, it's way easier just to I'm not doing any more extra math. I'm gonna say, let's go. You did an hour last week. Let's go an hour and 10.
Yeah.
Let's
hour
just
5, hour 10, gradual progression. Yeah.
It's just,
and that also helps account for the bad days that you may have. So you may have a bad day, and if you're going strictly mileage based, just a bad day can turn the same distance into totally different stress levels, totally different loads, totally different time out there. All of that can really get magnified just because you're having a bad day. So, but like you were saying, what's a safe progression? And as a coach, that's kind of what we're always trying to figure out. And there is no set number, but typically you're kind of safe if you're staying in that 10 to 20% where you're not ramping things more than that, week to week. So that's kind of the safe level. But us as coaches, if we know the athlete, and like Dale said, if they've got a history of training, they've got a base that they've built up from previous years, we can get away with doing more than that sometimes. A big component of that is what's the level of impact of the exercise, of the training that you're doing. So ramping up, say, duration on the bike, if you're doing endurance work, is less risky than upping the duration on the run, even also doing endurance work, just because the impact on the body is quite a bit more running than it is cycling. So being a little more conservative on the run is typically what we do instead of, and on the bike, it's a little more forgiving.
Yeah. And intensity, especially on the run, is kind of an exponential load on the body. So
go do some sprints.
Yeah. So if you go, even if you're using time, you go from an hour easy run to an hour track workout, hugely different load
Yeah.
on the body. So
And that's where this X factor is, right? Intensity is that's the X factor in all of this.
Yep.
Whether you're using distance or you're using time, intensity is the thing you really have to factor in along with your progression. So you could take same volume, and if you say every run I'm going to make full gas, that's more than a 10% increase in workload, right? And that's where, like the other podcast where we talked about training stress and what training stress really is, time and amount of intensity at that time period.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's transition a little bit, because it's not, we beat on distance here pretty good, but it's not, it's not all bad.
Yeah.
It's not, it's not
Sure.
not the worst thing you can do. In my opinion, if you are a beginner or like just getting into a sport, now we've had this example a million times. If you are a cyclist getting into running, you need to be careful, and I would highly recommend you progress time versus distance, because you got an engine, but your body is not ready to handle the load.
I honestly did that. This is probably 7 years ago. It was a while ago, where the season ended. Cross training time to do it. Gonna go for a run.
I saw that.
Yeah,
Saw it on your Strava.
Gonna go run to the trails. Ran to the trails, and I got there. I was like feeling good, out and back. Gonna hit a few miles on the trail too. Ended up being a 9-mile run, and about mile 5, shortly after I turned around to come home, oh my gosh, the wheels fell off. Lungs felt great.
Oh yeah,
Legs, hip flexors, quads,
lungs for
calves,
days. Yeah,
blisters, you name it. I was wrecked for days, and ended up with an IT band issue afterwards.
So your mind says yes, but your body says
That's a big fat no.
no.
That's a big no.
yeah. So like you're progressing again from into like a sport that your body is not familiar with. It doesn't matter how many miles or how much duration you've put in a different sport. It's a different demand. So we kind of have to pull ourselves back here and kind of rethink it and start slow. Start at the bottom.
Yep.
So like with like running, like especially, we always start people on time, but once you get into like things like track workouts, like that's where people they don't want to they're on a track. It's a specific distance. It's a circle.
Yeah.
Or oval.
It's
or whatever
controlled, right?
Yeah.
So that's like, when can you use distance? When the number of variables are controlled,
Yep.
and there's far fewer variables, distance is A-okay.
Absolutely.
Because now it's controlled.
Yeah,
it's
we know-
easily scaled. It's
we
not
know you're
like
doing-
flat to hills. It's not
Yep.
downhills, flat to downhill. It's not tailwind. It's not hit. We're not. If you aren't accounting for those things, you can totally use distance.
And to be honest, even when I give somebody a track workout, I still go in and estimate how long it's going to take them.
Yeah.
So that I know that I'm not putting too much load on them overall, like either by number of reps or
Yep.
like combine warm up, cool down reps, all that kind of thing. Because it's easy to think, okay, well, they can do 12 400s. That'll probably only take them this long. But depending on how much you want them to warm up and cool down, that session can turn into hour and 15 when you think it's only going to be an hour pretty quickly. So like for like you said, controllable scenarios, track, treadmill, pool, swimming, obviously, open water swimming lends itself more for like time, versus distance. But in the pool, obviously you have a set distance you're swimming. So,
And a very controlled environment.
but again, when we set people's progression in the pool, after a few swims, you kind of know about how fast they're swimming. So now we can estimate how long that is going to take them.
Yeah.
So we're still kind of working on time.
Yeah, as a coach, definitely. Yeah. Because that's part of like the overall workload for the week, which we're also considering is more time-based than it is distance-based, especially when you've got multiple disciplines that you're working with. And then we throw strength training in.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So you start throwing in, if you don't even if you're not working with time, what is strength? How do you add that into the program?
How do you quantify it?
Yeah. We just talked about how much training strength can put on the body.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you don't even consider it in the time that you're spending each week, that's that one
distance was zero.
Yeah, exactly.
Zero distance.
So for another example of who would be good to use distance, again, we kind of go back to those athletes who have a lot of chronological training in their legs. They're not going to a new sport. They may be coming off the off season, that sort of thing.
Yeah, more experience.
Yeah,
people. Yeah.
Or
they know what 3 miles feels like. Like they know what 3 miles is to them.
Yeah, and it's just easy. To some extent, it's just easier for them mentally. This is the big caveat here, is that some athletes just do better when you give them mileage.
Mm-hmm.
They would rather go out and click off miles and have those as their goals versus starting the clock and watching the clock every minute in a workout.
Yep.
So, sometimes it just works out mentally better for specific athletes.
Yep.
But those who have been in the sport a long time, you can generally ramp their overall duration back to normal levels pretty quickly. And so sometimes it's just go run 10 miles. But in the back of my head as a coach, I know, well, that's going to take them an hour and 15.
Yeah.
And when I'm planning that training, I'm still putting that time into the week. I'm not leaving it as a 10-mile run with no consideration of time.
Correct. And I think, all of that said, the biggest issue we have seen with beginners has been not accounting for intensity in the equation.
Yep.
So a lot of times beginners, and we see this all the time, and I was guilty of it too when I first got into riding, was I had a distance I wanted to go, which was 20 miles. And my goal was just to try to do it faster each time I went and did it. So in my mind, I was like, okay, well, I did it this fast the time before. If I've gotten stronger, I should be able to do it a little bit faster this next time, and a little bit faster the time after that. So every training session ended up being kind of hard, but not super hard. So accounting for intensity, knowing that some days should be harder than other days, is something, regardless of whether you're using time or distance, is something you need to be putting into the equation. Not only varying, but also considering, because hard 60-minute sessions done every day is going to cook you.
100%.
Regardless, or hard 5 miles or hard 20 miles, whatever metric you're using there, if all you're doing is going hard every time, you're going to get cooked on that. So be considering or take into consideration that for a good training program, you should be adjusting that intensity throughout the week.
Sure. And let's face it, of all the sports that we deal with, running's the troublemaker here. Mm-hmm. That's the swimming and cycling are generally low impact enough that kind of if you screw up a progression of
you can get away with it for longer.
Yeah, you can screw it up a little bit longer and probably not have an issue. But with running, I hope he doesn't listen to this. My neighbor, my neighbor came to me the other day, and he was saying that he was having some knee pain or whatever, and he's like, yeah, man, I went out and I ran 3 miles, and it was no big deal. And then ever since then, my knees have been hurting. And I'm like, well, how long? When was the last time you ran? He's like, well, I'm just getting back into it. I'm like, oh, okay,
yeah,
well, normally, like if somebody's been off running for a long time, like we start them with like 20-minute runs, like tops.
Yeah.
Like
when I get back into it, I will do 1 mile.
Yeah. 15
and easy.
Yeah. We generally work them with like 10 to 15 minute, get it to 3 times a week, 20 minutes, and then 30 minutes 3 times a week. And then you can start progressing a long run.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of our standard progression into running, whether that means you're new to it or, in some cases, some people may end up starting walk running and stuff like that. But that's why we start with time, because like if I just said, again, go for 2 miles. Well, if you're walk running, that 2 miles is going to take you however long. And then when you start to run a little bit more, it's not going to take you as long, but it's going to be higher impact on your body because you're running more.
Yeah.
Less
recovery for the body. Well, and that's like all of this as coaches. When I first started thinking about this topic, it kind of jumped into my mind because I had a new athlete who I was talking with, and I was like, okay, what kind of, what's your longest duration, bike ride that you've done? And they're like how far? I'm like, no, how long? Like, what was the longest duration you actually went out there? Because 40 miles for someone who's trained a lot is a lot different than 40 miles who is untrained. So like mileage is not even equal amongst fitness levels.
Yeah.
So knowing but the intensity could be the same. Like hard for him is hard for me on the body. Like just because I may be going faster, for example, like doesn't mean that that's a lot more stress on my body than it would be for him going hard. But 40 miles is certainly a lot different from a time standpoint. So it's a good way for us as coaches to know where we're starting someone when we know how long they're used to training. Like what is your longest as opposed to what is your farthest? Because your 20 miles is not equal even amongst people.
Yeah. So we've pretty much hit on like how using distance versus time can easily get you overtrained, but there's a really good example of how using distance versus time can really get you undertrained. So, in the example where like around here, we don't have a ton of gravel to train on. And so we get a lot of athletes who want to train for Unbound or, these
Mid-South.
Yeah, these epic 100, 200 mile, gravel races. And you do the majority of your training on the road. Well, if you're going out and you're doing a 100 mile or 120 mile day, in your training, and maybe let's just say you're pretty fit, and that 120 mile day takes you 6 hours. Well, 120 miles on gravel,
it's a different load,
can easily, be 4 hours longer, that sort of thing. So, if that's the way you're training by distance versus time, you're going to be pretty undertrained for, a 100 mile or 200 mile race. If you've only been hitting distance on the road versus distance on the type of, whatever you're going to race on, it's the same thing for people training for like ultras by distance. They're training, I actually kind of made this mistake myself when I was training for Walking Tall 50K the first time. I did a lot of my training on the treadmill, like, because I was trying to simulate uphills and stuff, but I still run a heck of a lot faster on the treadmill than I do on the trails.
Yeah.
And so my longest run going into Walking Tall was 20 miles. And that took me, I don't know, less than 3 hours on a treadmill. And I was out there for 5. I was out there 5.5 hours.
Yeah.
So,
a massive difference.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, all that to say that training distance over time can have both effects. It can, depending on like the event you're doing, it can have you overtrained or it can have you undertrained. But the going by time and intensity is the most predictable way to increase workload and simulate demands of that event. Because again, you have a 6 mile, a 6 mile climb that's probably going to take most people. This is
kind of the beauty of Strava. Like, I was just going to jump in here.
Yeah.
Like, you can go and look. It could be a course that you've never done before, but you can go into Strava now and say, okay, well, here's the climb. It's a segment. I can look at it. I can say, okay, who's in my weight class and what kind of times were they doing at, for cyclists, at what power level I would be close to. And okay, that 6 miles is 35 minutes. I may have been thinking, oh, it's going to be 25 minutes. But you can kind of look at that and better know what duration may end up being based off of your metrics.
And that's how I've gone and planned for a lot of people who are doing ultras and gravel events and stuff like that. Like, I will go and look at like average times up this climb.
Yeah, what the pro do.
And they're like, and they're like, okay, well, they're like, it's a 6 mile climb.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, but it's going to take you this long, or it could take you this long. So we're not going to do 6 mile uphills. We're going to do this amount of time working on uphill, to simulate it as best as possible.
And I guess the last thing I'll say, I don't know if you've got other stuff to talk about, is from a road racing perspective, I'm not generally thinking about mileage at all, like, because I don't know what the pack, I can have a feeling what the pack's going to do, but if I were to ride a course, Crosswinds, the previous Crosswinds course is kind of a good example of this. Flat course, pancake, like 10 foot, and that's legit 10 foot per lap. It's 65 miles. Like, if I'm going to ride 65 miles solo, that time's going to be over 3 hours, 20 mile an hour average, say. In the race, it's like 235, 240 ride time. So, like, nutrition wise, what I'm thinking is, okay, that's going to be a 2.5 hour, 2 hour and 45 minute race, not 65 miles group ride that I usually do at 20 miles an hour. Now we're going 25. So knowing that being in a pack is going to totally impact what that distance is and what my nutritional demands are going to be during an event.
And generally speaking, in road racing, when people start dropping the hammer, they're not like, well, I'm going to drop it for 2 miles. I'm only dropping this hammer for 2 miles.
Yeah.
It's unexpected durations of time, at intensity. So again, let's, this horse is not getting up.
It's not. We've got it pinned.
So we
got a vegan killing a horse today.
I know it's pretty short, not to the point. We hammered the point.
The point's been,
but that it just kind of goes to show, like, training distance versus time can get you overtrained. It can get you undertrained. That working
it's harder
on
to scale. It doesn't account for variables.
Right.
Yeah.
So kids, stick to time.
Yep.
All right. That's all I got today. Appreciate everyone hanging out, listening, watching. We'll catch you guys next time. Adios.
Peace.